asked Pastor Brian if I could get a couple announcements. I'm going to do a little PSA first of all. As I came into church this morning, the first thing is I found a ring, and it's on my pinky, so it's a little one. So if somebody lost a ring, come find me after church. I'd also like to thank the fellowship team members who so graciously give up their time to coordinate people, to bring treats downstairs, to bring coffee. So thank you to them, but also thank you to everyone who has brought treats. We'll continue to bring treats, donuts, coffee, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be anything fancy when somebody calls you. I know that many of you work during the week, so to bake something for Sunday is not always easy. So thank you for whatever you bring. And this morning you'll have powdered donuts on my behalf, and the powdered donuts are not made homemade, but somebody made them, not me. Also, there will be no coffee next week or June 2nd because of Memorial Day weekend, and June 2nd we will be in the park listening to Charles give us a message. And just like me, anybody can stand up here and read. Somebody can stand up here and give the children's message. There is a sign-up sheet in the back, so don't be afraid to step out of the box a little bit and use your gifts and talents. And just one last thing before we read third graders and one fourth grader, I would encourage you to bring your Bibles to church, to bring a highlighter, to bring a pencil, to underline, use your Bible. That's what it's there for, because there will be many scriptures that you will want to remember as you get older, as you get my age. And Blake, I know you received a Bible probably when you were a third grader. Don't be afraid to take that to college and rely on the Word of God when you go on your way. And with that, if you as third or fourth graders want to open up your Bible to Ephesians 6, and if you can find it, and if you want to follow along with me, because this one will pertain to you, Ephesians 6:1, it says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your mother and father, which is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you, and that you may enjoy a long life on the earth."
You remain seated. We're going to say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Well, as I stated before, we have been talking about having recipes for family success. Last week we talked about moms, appropriately on Mother's Day. And so today we're going to be talking about children. Now normally I would have talked about marriage first, but because this is our last Sunday with our children for Sunday school, and we have a fun Sunday school lesson prepared for them afterward, we decided to move that around. So next week we'll be talking about marriage. We just finished up our Love and Respect class last night. It was just a great time. It was also sad because we will no longer be gathering on Sunday nights. We did so for 14 weeks in a row. And all 6 couples went through all 14 weeks. And we greatly enjoyed it. We loved being with one another. But we have to move on. And I know that they will greatly enrich others as well in the years to come. But we're talking about family success. We've talked about the different parts that are in it. You know, my own kids, they're all different. And I'm sure any parent here will tell you that every child that they have, they're all different. Our oldest one, Tabitha, is, shall we say, a little headstrong, as all firstborns are. Firstborn, okay? And so sometimes she was a little struggle for her mother. She and I got along pretty well because we were very similar and we got to do a lot of things together. But one of the things that's unique about our children is that all of our kids have a middle name that starts with the letter A. So Tabitha Ann, Nicole Angelique, Christopher Andrew, and Corinne Alicia. We wanted them to be different, but yet we also wanted them to identify with the family. Now, of course, they had our family name, but our girls no longer share that name with us anymore. So we chose a middle name that starts with the letter A. Each one is different. Each one is fun. Each one had to discipline differently. So Tabitha, our oldest one, being very stubborn and being very who she was, you could spank her all day long. And it didn't matter. She'd be almost like looking in your face like, I dare you to do it again. So we found something that caused her the greatest displeasure in her life. It was called hugging the pole. In our house in California, we had a pole that was at the bottom of our staircase. And so when she got in trouble, she had to go sit at that pole and hug the pole, and the rule was she could not talk to anybody else, and none of the other kids could talk to her. So Tabitha, being the social butterfly, she had to endure the pain of not being able to contact or talk with anybody and to hug that pole the entire time. You might as well have sent her to hell by putting her on that pole. Now Nicole was different. A little bit of spanking, that helped Nicole. Didn't have to do it too often when she was little. And one of these days I'll share with you a very funny story about spanking. That will embarrass her to no end, because she does listen to these online. Our son Christopher, we didn't have to do hardly any discipline at all. I know that sounds strange, that a boy would have very little discipline. We actually had more struggles with him after he came back from the army, weirdly to say, than we did when he was growing up. Corinne, it was whatever worked. Being the youngest, she's smart, she was always challenging things. Sometimes this would work and sometimes that would work, and we had to just be unique in the ways that we did it. I'll never forget with my oldest daughter, one time, here we were in the Philippines. And my daughter and I are sitting there, and we had, the way that we would do showers there is we had a little bucket of water, and you would fill it up, and then you'd take the water, and you'd get yourself wet, then you'd soap up, and then you would then you'd rinse yourself off. She was about 2 at the time, and so we always did it in the afternoon because all the Filipinos would take siesta. So they would go and they would take a nap in the afternoon when it was nice and hot. Well, because they were not using the water in the tank and in the lines would get nice and warm. Otherwise, it was like 50 degrees coming out of the ground. And so it was the only time of the day that there was warm water. So I had poured the bucket of warm water and I was ready to go. I walked out of the room, came back in, and Tabitha had knocked that bucket of water over. I wanted to spank her bottom. But I said, you know what, that won't do any good. So what I did was I said, Tabitha, you now have to clean up all the water you just spilled. Of course, all the water went down the drain. But it was a lesson that she learned, and she now had to clean up the water, which she did, and then she never spilled that water again. Unfortunately, that day I had to take a cold shower. That was not fun. So every child is different. And so when we talk about the scriptures and we talk about how to grow up our children and how to discipline them, there's not like a one set of rules that works for everybody. It's different. We're going to be talking more about principles here, and that's what I want to talk about. So here we are. This is a menu for a German chocolate cake. I am not going to do it today. We're not having it afterward for snack. But as you can see here, it has all of the materials. Now, first of all, there's a base ingredient, which is flour. It forms the core, the foundation of this cake. Now, it doesn't mean that's where all the flavor is going to come from. But without it, it's not the same. So our recipe here is for a cake. But we also need sugar and buttermilk and eggs. That all adds to it. All these base ingredients adds to it to give that base of a taste. But then we got to add the cocoa because that is what gives us this German chocolate flavor. If I was to make this recipe, I would have a delicious German chocolate cake. Like a family of God is the foundation. And there's a mom and dad, we have a family. But you'll notice something, those of you who are cooks in the room, there is something missing. Does anybody know what I might not have put on that recipe? This will make a delicious German chocolate cake, just as it is. But you notice that there's no icing mentioned, is there? German chocolate cake is almost not German chocolate cake without icing. Almost. It's still German chocolate cake. But the thing about icing is you can put on all kinds of icing, can't you? You can put on multiple types of icing if you want. Half this and half that. That's like children. Children add flavor to our life. They can be quite different. And they add a different flavor to our families. But sometimes children are looked at like this. Notice the recipe for iced coffee. Have kids, make coffee, forget that you made the coffee, drink it cold. Or it could be this. Kids call it yelling when I raise my voice. I call it motivational speaking for the selective listener. I think that might apply to some of us men too. Or it could be this. The quickest way for a parent to get a child's attention is to sit down and look comfortable. Or parenthood, the scariest hood you will ever go through. And sometimes we see that in our world, that's oftentimes what is talked about with our children. And sometimes even raising children is almost a dread. But I want to talk about raising children as the honor that it should be. And so we're going to be in chapter 6, as we read earlier, that Mary Ann read for us. And I want to focus on this one thing, that children are a gift and a responsibility. They are a gift from God to us. But then once they're given to us, they're a responsibility to raise them to love Him. You know, I had 3 big changes in my life. The first one, when I was about 20 years old, I came to Christ. That was a huge change in my life. I went from a very selfish person to a less selfish person. But you see, the thing is about that is that I had a God who was over me, who was watching over me and caring for me. The second big change in my life came when I married. And my wife and I have now been married for 34 years. But you see, there was a partnership then. My life didn't change a whole lot when we got married, except, there's a few things, but the reality is, it just wasn't the same as when my first child was born. I know this sounds weird, but probably the greatest change in my life happened when I became a dad. You see, in my relationship with God, He's in control. I just listen and follow Him. In my relationship with my wife, we're partners in ministry, and we do things together. But now I'm holding this child who is totally defenseless. This child cannot take care of itself without my loving care. And I realize that God had given me a gift to raise Tabitha to love Him. And so, when I see these stories in the Bible, and when I hear the teaching, I recognize that we have a job. So we're in Ephesians. Now, I'm just going to quickly go over it. Ephesians, as I've stated many times, all the books typically are written to a church or to an individual, and there's certain things that Paul wants to discuss, and then along the lines, there's some theological truths that he teaches. Ephesians is different. It appears that Ephesians was not written just to the Ephesian church. It was actually written to a number of churches in the Ephesian area. And so there wasn't any mention of specific problems that he wanted to deal with or specific people he wanted to address. And so when we look at this, that's why we can look at this chapter and say this truly is something that is meant for all children, for all marriages. And so the purpose was here then is to teach the church about these truths. The context of here is in the verses before this, in chapter 5, talks about marriage. So in other words, stating that marriage comes first, then our children. And marriage is really that foundation that we need. If the father will love his wife, and the mother respect her husband, then the children will grow up in a safe environment. And I'll talk more about this next week when we talk about marriages. Well, kids, here's the first thing it says. It says, children, obey. You're all thinking, oh, seriously, I gotta obey? And then Paul goes and says, here's the reasons why you need to obey. You see, children are willful. We all know that as parents, right? And therefore are capable of listening to and heeding the direction of their parents. It's a way for them to respond to authority that's placed over them by God. There's a lady, I'll never forget this story. She was training her dog. And the dog trainer was watching her, and the lady would take the dog and says, Fido, sit. Fido, sit. Sit, Fido. Fido, sit. Finally, he'd sit. Dog trainer comes over and says, ma'am, can I ask you a question? She goes, sure. She goes, do you have discipline problems with your children at home? And she goes, how did you know? He said, because it took you 3 times to get that dog to sit down. And you're dealing with smart kids. So in the parenting class that my wife and I will be putting on next year called As For Me, we talk about first-time obedience, and we show parents how to get their children to obey for the first time that it's stated. And your parents are all going, oh boy, can't wait for that class. But it works. It works very well. And it's done in a loving way. But notice, kids, it says, in the Lord. It says, children, obey your parents in the Lord. Now, this doesn't mean that your parents have to be Christians to obey them. This means it's for you as children. You as a devotion to God. You're the one that's in the Lord. You're the one that's being called to obey here. It's not about whether or not the parents are good or bad. Hey, listen, us as parents, we don't always do a good job. We make mistakes, and Angel and I will admit that we made a ton of mistakes as we're raising our kids. But it's still a responsibility of children to obey their parents. I know this is hard teaching, but it's true. It says it right there in the Bible. It's a reminder, children were not highly honored at that time. Kids, think about this. Back in that day, if children were being obnoxious towards their parents, they had the right to kill them and not go to jail. And so you can see back then that children were not highly honored back then. Think of all the stories when Jesus is out in public, and the disciples are trying to keep the children away from Jesus. And he says, don't shoo them away. Let them come unto me. And then he uses them as stories on how to really be having the faith of a child. But it's also, Paul adds this next statement. He says, because it is right. He says, children, obey your parents, Lord, for this is right. You see, it's not only right biblically, it's right even in the world. The natural world even provides many teachings and truths to show you that having obedient children creates obedient citizens. You see, children are not capable of being on their own, as I mentioned earlier. Their spiritual values are formed by you parents. And by the age of 13, basically all of their spiritual values have been set in stone. They may change a little bit as they get older, but the reality is, much of who they are spiritually is basically completed by the age of 13. Verse 2, he goes on and says, now, not only this, he says, but to honor your mom and dad, because it's the first commandment with a promise. Whereas obedience is a duty that you're supposed to do, honor is an attitude. For instance, when I was a pastor I was an associate pastor at a church in Oregon. It was a church of about 200. There was only 2 pastors on staff, the senior pastor and myself. I was the children's pastor. But I was much older than the senior pastor. And so there was a danger that I knew that might happen, is that people would start looking to me because of my age. So what I did was, even on Sunday nights when we were doing services together, if I was leading the service, I always deferred to him. I always showed honor to him. And because of that, the people never saw me as their senior pastor. They always saw Terry as the senior pastor. Because I honored him, and I did that because it was my attitude, and I did it publicly in front of everybody. And children, that's the same as what we're saying with parents. That there's a way to honor your parents publicly. I can't tell you the number of times that my wife and I would go to a restaurant, and as we were leaving, someone would come by us and says, man, your children are so well behaved. So often we don't see kids behaving in restaurants. So that was a great way in which they could honor us. And the idea of bringing on a commandment, it's not that this is a commandment that now is the law that you have to obey. It's rather Paul is reminding people that God even thought about this, and he put this commandment in there, and he gave it a promise. And here's the promise. It says, there will be a well life with you. Things will go well for you. You guys know that if you listen to mom and dad and do what they say, things will go better. You don't get spanked, and you don't get disciplined, you don't get your phone taken away, or your iPad, or whatever else. And it usually means a long life. There was a time I wasn't so sure I was going to have a long life, because when I was a kid, I was not so obedient. I remember one day, I was 16 or 17. I was 5'6", 5'7" at the time, and maybe 120 pounds. And I had purchased my own car. Paid for all the insurance, all the gas, so I was sure that I could just do anything I wanted because I had my own car. One day I said I was going to go out somewhere. My dad said, no, you're not. You're staying home tonight. And I said, no, I'm not. And he said, oh, yes, you are. And I said, I paid for that car. I can go and do what I want. So as I'm walking out the door, my dad, who was 6 foot tall, remember I said I was 5'7" at the time, and I was 120 and he was 200, standing on the brick landing, so now he was 6'4". And I said, I'm going. He said, no, you're not. And all of a sudden, this hand goes like this from my dad. And his fist was about this big. And I'm like, I'm gonna die. Right now. Somehow he withdrew his fist, walked up the stairs to his bedroom, and I made a prompt turnaround and went back to the living room. I did not go anywhere that night. And now that's why I'm almost 60. But you see, it's a promise, and Paul wanted to make it very clear. You know, there's a good life ahead of you if you live obedient life. And so treasure your parents and treasure them. In 6:4 it says this, and this is a very interesting part. And you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. Isn't that interesting that the parents are brought in here? My question is this: why would Paul have to give this instruction? What is our tendency as parents? Like parents of their day, they had the right to demand their children to obey them. And if they didn't, they could suffer severe penalty. You see, God doesn't want us to frustrate our kids. When I did that little exercise with Jace, remember if I had done it over and over and over again, he would have become frustrated. Now, I don't know his temperament. Maybe he would have gotten mad. I don't know. I've never seen him get mad. But maybe he would have. But then when I gave him additional instruction, he was able to get the reward of that dollar. And that's true of us. Not just as children, but true of us as parents as well. This is our job, parents. Typically, we rule our house with rules, don't we? Do this, do this, do this. Rather than values. Let me give an example of this. As our kids grew up, they inevitably came to that time where they started to drive. Parents' worst nightmare. Not just the insurance. We at one time had 3 kids in our home driving. Our insurance was $7,000 a year for car insurance. But here we were with our kids, and we're worried about them. But the curfew was midnight. They had to be home by midnight. As they got older, especially as they got into their teen years and were going to college and they stayed at home with us, as they went to college, they still had to have the same midnight curfew. They're like, Dad, we're like 19, 20 years old. There should not be curfew. We should be able to stay out later. And I'm like, no, the curfew is 12, and if you don't like it, you can leave. And they said, well, Dad, that doesn't make sense. Why should we do that? I was like, well, you kids know that I was in law enforcement for a number of years. And they go, yes. And one of the statistics that I saw, and one of the things I know, is that between midnight and 6 in the morning are the most accidents on the street. And especially between midnight and 3. So the reason why you're not staying out past midnight is because it's not about you, it's about everybody else. And the thing is, my wife and I follow the same rule. If it's good for them, it was good for us. Very rarely will we go out past midnight for anything. Because we want to demonstrate to our kids that the rule was not just a rule we set because we wanted them home by a certain time, but because there was a safety reason behind it. We did not want to frustrate our children. And that's what this scripture here addresses, not frustrating your children. Don't provoke them to wrath. This idea of train them, is this idea of nurturing them and building them up. It's one of caring for them and watching over them. At the same time, though, any of you who have been in sports, you know that there's part of training is there's just a little bit of pain that goes with it. A little bit of exhaustion that goes with it as well. And as raising children, sometimes it can be very exhausting. And sometimes children are not so happy with some of the discipline we give them or the things that we tell them to do. But it's good for them, and we know that. So kids, when mom and dad tell you to do something, it means it's good for you. Okay? There's a good reason why they want you to do certain things. It's important. Because they want to nourish you and raise you up, and they want to make sure that you're taken care of. Here's a quote on the idea of admonishment, and to admonish them means this: parents should care more for the loyalty of their children to Christ than for anything besides, more than this for their health, their intellectual vigor and brilliance, their material prosperity, their social position, their exemption from great sorrows and great misfortunes. This is what parents should be doing. You see, here's the thing. We need to lead them with love and not as their lords. My wife and I are going to be doing a As For Me class, a child raising class in January of 2002. We're going to be talking about how to raise children for God and the importance of what we do as parents. Just one little simple advice for your dads. When you're dealing with children and their discipline, especially if they've been giving a few unwarranted words to mama. Don't ever say to her, "You don't treat your mother that way." Here's what you say. "Do not talk to my wife that way." I know it's a simple little thing, but it makes a difference. You see, the point is that they as children need to understand that mom and dad are the primary family unit. The German chocolate cake, it's a German chocolate cake. Mom and dad are family. The icing is just the icing on the cake. Children are an addition to the family. Husband and wife begin the family. So, dads, when you see that, remember that. Now, we talked about training and admonishing, so I thought I'd find a little video that would teach us men how to indeed train up our children.
You know, my son is getting older, and we're approaching the time where we're going to have the talk.
I mean, there's a real battle going on out there for the hearts and minds of our children.
We decided to be more proactive and intentional with our daughter.
My father instilled in me this passion, and his father before him. I feel tremendous pressure to get this right.
All you can hope for is that they remember everything they were taught.
It's important to start young when building a foundation. When the hard times hit, they won't stray. They will remain faithful.
It's never too early to introduce your kids to your favorite sports team.
We live in Dallas, so a lot of the kids on the playground are Cowboy fans. We're going to try to keep her Cowboy free as long as possible.
I had her young Lakers when she was still little.
This is a legacy that I want to pass down to my kids, my grandkids, my great-grandkids, my great-grandkids' grandkids. You know, if the world still exists.
There are a few very important things that he needs to know before growing up. One, that Michael Jordan is the best to ever play the game, hands down. I don't want my son to grow up in a world where LeBron James is the greatest of all time. I mean, 6 championships, in the discussion.
The Cowboys cheat, the Cowboys killed SpongeBob, whatever it takes to get this idea out of her head that the Cowboys are cool, I will do it. If it means dressing up like a cowboy and scaring her in the middle of the night with a chainsaw, I will do it.
I don't want to force it on her, but let's face it, I'm gonna have to. It's the Royals we're talking about.
I have a daughter. But hey, who said it's going to be easy? It's all about being intentional. All you have to do is plant the seed.
As a Red Sox fan, I really want to teach him.
Hey, Dad, Mom needs you downstairs.
You know, I didn't start early enough for that. I wish I had.
Can I accept my son liking another team besides mine? No, I couldn't. Does that make me a bad father? No. It makes me a great father.
I thought you would like that. A little humor. But you notice something? What was going on with all of those dads? They were spending time with their kids. They were creating memories with them. Now, if they would spend that same amount of energy and time for their favorite sports team as they would with teaching them about Christ, the world would be a different place. Now, don't get me wrong. Most of my kids are Husker fans. I just want you to understand that's clear. They are Husker fans. But my kids love the Lord. You see, this is what this whole thing is. The results of the message is this. Enjoy family. Enjoy your time together. Whether it's out fishing. Dale and Jabin went out fishing the other week. I asked him if he did any fishing this weekend, and the answer was no. It's not the best weather for it, I guess. Could be archery, basketball, going to a museum, taking the kids to a special event, which we'll talk about in a second. And listen to their heart. My daughter, Nicole, is our middle daughter, and she lives in Springfield, Missouri. She's a very difficult job, and she would call me every once in a while and talk about it and get some advice on how to deal with certain things. And then when I would hang up, she would say goodbye, but it always seemed like this really sad goodbye. So one day, I said to her, Nicole, when you say goodbye, it seems like it's a sad goodbye. Were you wanting to talk more with me than just that question? She goes, yeah, Dad, I wanted to. And I'm very ready just to sit and talk with you. So I said, okay, from now on, you tell me when the discussion is over. And so from that point on, when she calls me, she may ask me advice on something, but then we'll talk. And now when she says goodbye, she goes, goodbye, Daddy. Instead of goodbye, Dad. It's a listening to their heart. Enjoy your family, even as they get older. Maybe it means having them go to camp. Inside of your bulletins is a flyer on the camp that's out at Prairie Bible Camp in Lair. There's no charge for it, it's free. It's something but we do want to take free will offerings to help it. It's an opportunity for your kids to get away from all the distractions of the world and to go out and spend a few days there. In just a couple of weeks, we're going to be doing the Shipwreck VBS over at the Baptist Church, and I and a number of our leaders will be going over there. It'd be great to have more. The more people, the merrier. We're going to have games and crafts and story time and all kinds of things. You can see all the activities that's going to be involved. These are things that your kids can do. I want to leave you with this question. What family memory brings you a smile? I see Roland over there. He's smiling right now. He's thinking about something right now. What was a family memory that you had that you can remember that brings you a smile? So we have a little video. I want you to watch, and then have the team that was part of that, they would come up and have, they're going to talk a little bit about it afterwards. Josh, what was that all about? There, smiling. There, say that for us.
How many are in the cab? Who do they go to? What is in these boxes? Library books. And who put them in the boxes? How did you do it? How many books do you have? 575. Where do you think they'll go? To the library in Africa.
Anthony in here looks strong. Carrying that big book.
You just want us to share a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Tell us a little bit how it got started and what you guys did, just the impressions that you had. That'd be great.
I guess I discovered this from another church that was taking their youth up there, and just checked into the opportunity. Thought it would be a great way for our kids to do a service and see how good it feels in their hearts to give back. And I have tears because it was such a joy to see the excitement, and all of them. Can we go back every month? That stuck with me. And they loved it. They wanted more work. And they really would go back every month. And it was educational. They got to hear where this stuff was going, who it was going to help. Some of it does stay in the United States. They've sent stuff to Nebraska to help with the flooding. And then a lot of it does go to Mexico, Africa, and different countries. So they all found something they loved, and they want to put together their own packages to take up there. So it's something we will definitely do again. And I'm so proud of all of you guys, your hard work, and that we got to have some fun too.
I would just say the education team helped with this, and if you're ever asked to be a part of a team within this church, or if you're interested, please volunteer and use your talents. We work together as a team. Brenda donated sandwiches. We had a picnic lunch in 44-degree weather, which the kids were really excited about. We ran to the Buffalo to get some energy burned off before we had to get back on the bus. We went to the Buffalo Museum. So we did some educational, but the real heart of it was just the giving back. And Orphan Grain Train is something that Bible School is also going to donate their offering to, correct? It's something that would take volunteers anytime. You can learn more, ogt.org is their website. Jamestown is the only location in North Dakota, but I think it's something we'll all become more involved in. And I also, Pete Kevaney drove bus on short notice. It was just a really phenomenal. We had 17 kids from this church, from kindergarten through grade 5, I believe. So it was just thank you to the kids and to the parents for encouraging them. It was powerful to see, I think, for us as volunteers, a little bit nervous to take 17 kids by ourselves, just how well behaved they were and how honored they were to give back. And it taught me more from the kids' example and, yeah, the asking constantly, when are we coming again? So kids, if you attended, you would want to just stand up and be recognized. They ran out of jobs for them at Orphan Grain Train. They worked so hard.
We are very proud of you kids. And you see all those smiling faces and the joy that you had of doing that. I'm sure Mom and Dad would like to see those same smiling faces when you're cleaning your room. But, so raising kids, and as we're closing on this, each day of our lives we make deposits into the memory banks of our children. What happened yesterday? These kids will never forget that. They're never going to forget Dale going out fishing one night. Dana, your son is never going to forget when you go out fishing with him, or hunting, or go bike riding, or when he gets old enough and he can go ride on a motorcycle with you. He's never going to forget those things. Your child will follow your example, not your advice. And so yesterday was a great example of that. So next week we're going to be talking about marriage, and I want to encourage you to come to that. I know it's Memorial Day weekend, but I think that you'll enjoy it as we talk about marriage, talk about some of the things that have happened in our classes. And so for now, we want to honor a young man who's been part of our church for a long time. Blake, if you will please come forward.